So my first memory, which is actually not my memory, was my mother's memory, was going on a canoe camping trip. Her canoe tipped over with all of the belongings, including myself. I went floating down the river in a diaper, and yeah, that's why I love the water. First fish I caught was in a canoe. Hooked a real nice fish. Canoe just went. I grew up in St. Petersburg, Florida, which is Tampa Bay area. That place is so cool because it has so much coastline. In that bay, in the inland waterways, everybody has a dock, everybody has a boat, and as a kid, I was really fortunate to grow up in that. So I got to take the canoe out, go catfishing at night. We would paddle through these kind of like mangrove islands, and then when I was 13, somehow my parents decided it was a good idea to let me loose on the boat, and we would just go wakeboarding or fishing or whatever it was, but that was kind of our freedom, as a teenager or whatever, and really loved that and loved being on the water and how it is kind of, a lot of stuff is in your hands. There are no like turn signals, there are no lane lines, it's just like if you hit the sandbar, you're an idiot. Don't hit the sandbar. So, I don't know, I really liked that, but I think for freediving specifically and just being in the water, we had a pool, which you kind of need in Florida because it's a swamp. So to escape the heat, we get in there and play Marco Polo a lot, and that was my first foray into freediving, was holding my breath and trying to just like beat my sister and my dad. But as I continued on, I swam for a little bit, decided swimming was boring and I wanted to hit people, so I played football. But like during the whole time we were wakeboarding quite a bit and fishing. When I was getting towards the end of high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. All I knew is that I didn't want a desk job. And a couple of the guys that I wrestled with were going to West Point and going to join the Army. And I thought, wow, that sounds pretty exciting, and I could do basically the same thing, but instead of getting stationed in Oklahoma or Kansas or something like that, I could be in the Navy and do stuff on the water and get stationed, worst case, Virginia, which I did. But yeah, went into the Navy for that. When I was at the Naval Academy, funny enough, I'd always been my dad's like anchor. I'm not gonna call myself a wench, but anchor person, anchor hauler. Yeah, as soon as I got into the Naval Academy, he just got a nice new boat with a electric winch. And I was like, huh, all right. See where this came from. While I was there, I, again, still didn't know what I wanted to do. First, I went into political science because I was like, we're going to change the world and do all this and that. Realized that was not going to happen. Then I went into history. At that time, it was kind of coming out that we had screwed things up in Iraq and Afghanistan, and a lot of it was because we just didn't know and or appreciate the cultures that were there. If there were to be somebody that got sent out there, I wanted to be that person, and I wanted to, deal with things in a better way. So that history was a great way to do that, until I took a class called historiography, which was the history of history, and it was taught right after lunch by a 75-year-old lady, and we learned about how different historians wrote, and that was literally the class, and I could not do it. I felt so bad falling asleep in that class, but at the same time there was nothing that could keep me awake in it. And so that winter, I remember being home and being out on the boat and just having it click where I was like, I don't care what it is. I don't know what it is, but I want to be on the water and I want to be doing this. And so I studied oceanography, which is great because we got to watch surf movies. But I also learned a lot about, how waves are created, how, in physical oceanography, how sediment transport works, how, I don't know, I found it really fascinating. So followed that, and then at the end of college, you have to figure out what branch of the Navy you want to go into. For a while, I was into the high-speed Navy SEALs or EOD type of thing. For a while, I thought about Marines, and then I spent about 2 days with them and decided that was not a good fit. But at the end of the day, I knew I wanted something where I was on the water and I had leadership experience, and so being on a ship guarantees both of those. I went on a destroyer for about 2.5 years and then a frigate for another 1.5 years. And after that, I did a community transfer where I went from the ship community to an engineering community where I was able to do hard hat diving. So I went through 7 months of dive school and then was able to do a little bit of diving, not as much as I wanted. But I think this is probably the only time I've been about to hit the panic button. They say that the most dangerous marine mammal is a newly qualified diving officer, and so that was me at the time. So I was diving with a new group of people, hadn't met them, and my whole focus was just to not f up. And you go down there, and there are 3 people down there. You all have helmets that have hoses, and the hoses are 3 different hoses that are all braided together, so it's like a pretty thick thing, and they go back to the boat. You cannot see this far in front of your face because it's in Virginia, and it's cold and just not fun. But you're going through like the rudders and the propellers, and all your hoses, we call them umbilicals, are getting tangled up. And these divers have a sixth sense of just how to move around the boat without seeing things and kind of knowing where each other are at. And I was just like, I'm gonna stay out of here. I'll bring the tool bag back and forth and make sure that I don't get tangled up. Sure enough, I got tangled up. Pretty sure it wasn't my fault, but it doesn't matter because I was the new guy. And I just was like, I gotta get untangled. So I was trying to I was hanging onto the traveling line, which was underneath the hull of the ship, and trying to hang on to that with one arm and take this rat's nest of hoses and figure out where mine went, and then be like, okay, maybe if I pull the whole thing up here, I can get it out. And then you pull it out. Nope, that wasn't it. And you put it all back down, and doing this for probably 20 minutes. And I got so frustrated that I let go of the line. And so I sunk to the bottom, which was only 40 feet or so, but it was all silt. So whenever you move around, it goes completely black out. And that was the point where I had sunk up to almost to my chest in silt, and I was like, okay, I don't like this anymore. So I just decided to swim up in what I thought was up, so I would let air out and just follow the bubbles up because I couldn't see anything, and just followed them up until I rammed myself into the bottom of the ship. Somehow found the little traveling line from there, got clear enough that I could sort of move. Full panic, but was not going to tell anybody. And right at that point, the guys were like, hey, sir, can you come get this tool bag? I was like, yep, got it. Been waiting for you guys. But that was, just stupid little stuff like that. Yeah. The absolute last thing I would do was tell somebody I was in trouble.
What's it like training to hunt submarines?
I told you, I'd probably have to kill you.
Oh, damn.
That's not true, but it just sounds good to say.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, the submarine thing was, the tactics were really cool. And actually a lot of that stuff is secret, but it was one of those things where you train and train and train, not really expecting for anything to happen, and then boom, Chinese sub pops up, and you just have to, like, in the middle of the night, just be ready. And I think that was the thing with the Navy in general. My first deployment was, it was sort of a booze cruise. You know, it was like showing face, going to a lot of different places, and we felt like we trained a lot for things but didn't get to do much. And it's a weird thing because you train for war, and so you want to do what you're trained for, but you also don't want to go to war, but you want to feel like you've done something. And I think I was feeling like it was a bit of a waste of time, but I remember we took the ship with a team of Navy SEALs, or right next to this island in the Philippines. There was a known Al-Qaeda cell. They don't like ships getting in shallow water or anywhere near shallow water. And so there were two islands that were probably a mile apart, and we drove maybe half a mile, but we drove right through it. And this whole village of about 1,000 people, every single person was on the beach looking at the ship. And you could tell they'd never seen anything like that in their lives. And to me, it kind of showed how even if we're not doing anything, just being there kind of does make a difference in how other people act. So yeah, for the submarine thing, we didn't have a lot of specific missions that focused on that. We just had to be ready for it.
Yeah.
But it was pretty wild.
Yeah.
And submarine stuff is nuts. People worry about the U.S. military, but like our submarine stuff is pretty wild.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I was in the shipyard, I wasn't a huge fan of the environment. I guess I looked around and I did not see, I saw lots of people that were, 5, 10, 15 years ahead of me, and I saw what their jobs were and what their life looked like, and none of them really jumped out to me as being something that I wanted to do. And I was at 7 years. If I had stayed in, I would have been at 12 years. Once you get past 10, it's like you might as well get to 20, because then you get the full retirement pension and everything. So I kind of felt like now or never. I also started listening to a podcast called How I Built This, which is with people that have built businesses, and I found those stories to be really inspiring. And the biggest one that got me was Yvon Chouinard, who founded Patagonia, and his book, Let My People Go Surfing. And one of the things I'd seen in the Navy was you could have two ships, same equipment, same schedule. One ship could be loving their life and the other ship could be completely miserable, and it's because of the captain, and they just have such an effect on the lives of their whole crew. And so I wanted to be that person in the Navy that was able to have a crew that enjoyed their life, but then I didn't want to be in the Navy. I decided I wanted to get out. I decided I wanted to do my own thing, but I wasn't sure what that would be. And getting out of the Navy is kind of scary because you're in this thing from for me, it was from when I was 18 to 27, where they basically they take care of everything for you. So a lot of people kind of jump ship, as they say, and they get out of the Navy and just jump right into another secure job, which totally makes sense. But I was fortunate enough to have the GI Bill, and so I did my MBA. I knew I wanted to do something in business, but not sure what, and that gave me a good amount of time to test different things out and see what I liked. And as I was doing that, I had seen how conditions out here were pretty tough for diving, and how I hated when I would plan a whole like dive day, get everything together, go down to the dive site, get dressed out, get in the water, and it would just be complete garbage visibility. And saw how Surfline had kind of solved that problem, but for surfers. So while I was at grad school, I was trying to figure out how to create basically a surf line for diving. And as I was doing that, one of my friends that was working with me said, you know, if you want to get people in the water, you can just start a meetup. And I guess I should explain that too. Growing up, when I would go spearfishing with my dad, I would see how every time we went out, there were fewer fish, they were smaller, harder to find, and it was in my face, or the fact that fish populations were declining was right in my face, and that made me care about it and want to do something about it. And when I was surfing, I was still in the water, but I wasn't seeing that. And I thought that if you could just get people in the water to interact with that environment, then they build that connection, they care about it, and they want to do something about it. So that's why I wanted to create this like forecasting system. My friend said, yep, just start a meetup if you want to get people in the water. And eventually I did, and it was a complete disaster the first time. The first time we did a meetup, it was snorkel at the Marine Room and then have a beer afterwards. And for all these events, everybody came for the beer, but it got people in the water. But for this first event, it was Friday afternoon at La Jolla Shores. I had never been to La Jolla Shores at Friday afternoon. Had no idea that traffic would be ridiculous. And we ended up getting like 15 people to come to our first event. I was late to it. Not a surprise. And yeah, we had a few of my friends, but then we had a bunch of other people. We had a family with kids, all this stuff, and we tried to rent gear for them and, you know, set the whole thing up. It was pretty choppy that day. It was in the afternoon, so usually in San Diego, the wind picks up in the afternoon and it gets pretty choppy. That day was no exception. And I had no idea what I was doing. I said, all right, let's gear up. We're going to swim out, and then we're going to swim that way, and it's going to be great. And we start going out there, and the wind swell, like those short period waves, were just hammering people. I think we lost 4 sets of fins, a couple masks. There were children crying. There, just like the whole thing went up in flames. But despite all of that, everybody did get together afterwards and hung out, and they were so excited about it. And I think that keyed me in to the fact that it's not just the experience of diving, but it's having that group of people in that community. So we kept doing that, and eventually people started asking me questions about freediving, and I figured I should know what I'm talking about. So Martin Stepanek was coming in town, so I got my instructor cert from him, which was one of the most intense things I've ever done. And taught for, that was 2018, and so I taught for them for about 1.5 years. And then one of the instructors out here, Michael Tim, told me, you know, you've got to get out of the bubble. You've got to experience other agencies, other areas, other locations, other divers, because there's so much more out there. And I went to Deep Week in Bali. First, I went to the Azul Freediving Challenge that Pranamaya puts on, and I thought it was so cool to be around so many different divers. Every warm-up float, you're diving with an instructor, and they're talking to you, giving you tips on, you know, what to do with this, what to do with that. And every diver is, they're very experienced, but Julian puts this competition on in a way that's not intimidating. It's very much for beginner and intermediate divers, and so I was just amazed at how much knowledge I gained from that. And then going to Deep Week, very similar thing. Tons of different instructors, tons of different divers that all have their own little tips and tricks. Deep Week was cool because going to Bali, you meet a lot of freedivers that are in Asia and Australia, and I don't think it's necessarily that people do things differently. I think what interests me the most is that it's such an individual sport, and you can have one weird problem that you're trying to figure out, and you can talk to 10 different people and they'll give you the same textbook answer. But then that 11th person might say, yeah, I had this same weird thing happen to me. Everybody told me this. For some reason, I tried this and it worked. I don't know why. And then that's what makes it click. So it's exciting that the sport is so new and also so individual. Like there are guidelines of, yes, this is sort of how you should do it, but I wouldn't say there's one formula that works for every person. You also see that when you watch like Vertical Blue, and these world-class athletes have such different techniques and forms in their dives, but it works for them, and I think that's one of the coolest things about the sport. It was really cool meeting Adam at Deep Week. I still am a nobody, but had just started teaching recently and was interested in Molchanovs, and Adam was nice enough to, as I was leading up to it, we were trying to figure out how I could do a crossover, if I could do Deep Week, if I should instruct for Deep Week. I mean, plenty of annoying questions that I had for him that he was willing to take the time to answer. And then once I got there, it was nuts. I think we had 120 divers and probably 60 instructors. I was so impressed by Adam that he could be engaged and energetic through the whole thing. There's so many different things to juggle. But people were always asking him questions, and I mean, he's the guy. And so I was training for no fins because I wanted to get my instructor crossover, and so I had to do I think a 75-meter no fins or something like that. And I was in the pool and got some of my friends that were there with me to film me to see if I could do it. And I don't know why, but just decided to cut the strings loose on my bathing suit. So as soon as I pushed off, it became a natural no fins dive. And I got the video and sent it to Adam and was like, hey Adam, just wanted to send you a message. I'm really working on my no fins form. Was wondering if you could help me out, maybe give me some critiques or something. And I knew he was getting 100 of those a day, so he didn't send anything back for a couple of days. And then he finally took the time to be like, yes, all right, fine, I'll look at this. And I don't think he wanted to see it, but it made him laugh. Yeah.
And what was his response?
I think he said, he was like, I did not see that coming. I think what I learned from the Azul Freediving Challenge and from Deep Week is that the agency that you're certified under or that you're teaching under doesn't matter as much as the actual instructor and the community that you're with. And I know instructors that teach for multiple different agencies, and I think every agency has something that they do really well, some maybe more than others, but at the end of the day, you can have the top tier, most put together agency that has everything right on paper, and they can certify a brand new instructor, and you're not going to get as much from them as you would from somebody who has been in the water, you know, for years and years and has developed their teaching style, their ability, and the ability to hone in on specific specific things that can help get a student to the next level. So there's definitely there's so much to be said for the agencies, and there should be structure to these courses and how people progress. But that being said, it definitely comes down to the instructor.
You hosted your first meetup, which was hilarious. So like, what was like kind of like the next big step?
Basically that summer, I think we did every Friday morning, we did a meetup at La Jolla Cove, and then every Friday evening or afternoon, we did a meetup at the shores. And that got us into the parking at the Cove was a nightmare. So we eventually gravitated towards the shores, which isn't much better, but has a bigger parking lot. The whole thing kept growing, and I saw the thing that really kept me going with it was seeing brand new people show up to our group and their eyes would light up and they would say, I have been looking for something like this. I don't have a group like this. I've been wanting to try this. And so I saw that we were providing something.
Yeah. Like,
we were all snorkeling.
okay, so
yeah.
Still snorkeling. Okay.
Yeah. And that has, so I would say for about a year, it was just like meet up and snorkel and then go have a drink afterwards. And we also had weekly just social get-togethers. Personally, this will probably be something that we revisit because I know some of our, we've lost a lot of our original meetup people, which is a bummer. Like even Meredith, because they do just want to go out and snorkel and have something not intimidating. And I'm personally passionate about the sport of freediving, and so I started gearing our meetups towards line diving. I think it was probably when I started teaching classes. It just lined up where the Sunday depth session, you can also bring another float out for people that want to train. I think we had something that we kind of lost with just straight up snorkeling meetups where there's no worry about depth or anything like that. And I want to get back to that. And like on the scheming side, it's like, yeah, you bring people in there and then slowly get them into the sport of freediving. But there are also people that just want to snorkel and don't want to freedive. And I think that we should be there for them too, and probably haven't focused on that as much as we could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
And I say we, just so I can put some of the blame on you. Snorking and dorking.
Snorking and dorking.
Yeah. But it did catch on. We got a good amount of people to come out that summer. It was a lot of work, especially doing these for free, but it was so cool seeing how people lit up every single time. And then I also loved how the people that kept coming back were some of my favorite people. Just, my friend calls us the Island of Misfit Toys, and it started from the beginning. And it's just a bunch of clowns who are really cool, not there for like an ego type of thing, just low-key, hilarious, want to get in the water and have a beer. That's it. We did that, started teaching. The teaching thing was a cool side gig. Probably have like 4 students a month, maybe 8 students a month. COVID was a fun one. I put all my savings from the Navy into the Diveviz app and was trying to launch a Kickstarter campaign to fund that. And we launched it on my birthday, which was March 2nd, and that was in 2020. And so that's right when COVID hit, and then just everything shut down. And so at that point, the only way that I could make a living was teaching classes or driving boats, and I couldn't do either of those. So yeah, I think I was 32 at the time and had to go on unemployment, and tough. It's like, yeah, never had I expected myself to be in that situation, but I'm very grateful for it. But then, yep, Actually, at that time, I decided, you know what, I've got to make money. I've got to do something. So did the worst thing I could ever do. I shaved the beard, went for legit interviews, and I think I submitted my resume to 60 companies, and I got 1 call back and 0 interviews. And I was just like, this sucks. And I kind of got to the point where I was like, well, if I'm going to go down, I'm going to go down doing what I want to do. So let's try to make this work. And yeah, it was a rough spot, but yeah, we kind of doubled down, and I'm so glad that we did, because that summer it went from 8 students a month to 8 students a week every weekend for 3.5 months straight. I was also doing charters and everything, so it was great I was able to get myself out of debt and all that, but I also got completely burnt out and realized, okay, I cannot do this myself. So convinced Nathan to jump on that sinking ship with me. And us and Derek went down to Tulum to do an instructor course with Matt. And so we were able to teach more courses. And from there, I think between providing courses routinely, but also providing the weekly line diving sessions, started to build our foundation. That was another thing I had seen with teaching classes. It took me 6 years to dive in San Diego because it's so much better in Florida, let alone the Bahamas. I hated how people would come to this class and have 1 or 2 things go wrong, or it was just so much new stuff to absorb in one weekend, and they would leave feeling defeated. And so I wanted to give them some sort of way that they could feel like, hey, this is not a win or lose type of thing. This is just the start, and come back, keep diving with us, and you really will surprise yourself with what you're capable of. And I think Molchanov's does a great way of that's the philosophy that Molchanov's believes in, and I do too. It really has been being at the right time at the right place. The sport's growing. We've somehow found the right people to be part of our crew, and the right people to show up to our events. I think the clearest moment for me was, we were all an online thing, teaching out of other shops, and then we had some issues with the rental gear from the other shops, so they turned it over to us. But we didn't have a brick and mortar location, so we kind of started looking into that, and it was more because nobody else was doing it. I realize now why nobody else is doing it, but it is something that helps people's experience. Like if they're first time freediving or whatever, you do need to give them the right gear, and having it all in one spot is valuable. So we started doing that, realized we needed a brick and mortar location, and during COVID, all the pools shut down. We were small enough that we could still teach classes and get away with it because nobody was really looking for us. And so we started doing stuff in Mission Bay, shallow water sessions. Then the plunge, the pool a mile away from us opened up before any other pool did. So our operations kind of started focusing around Mission Beach. And then we found this spot for sale, and it was one of those things that was a complete Hail Mary. And I, asked some people in my family that are involved in real estate, like, hey, what do you think about this? How do we go about doing this? Is this a good idea? This is not a bad idea. And they kind of walked me, I wouldn't say they walked me, they grilled me through the whole process. And yeah, we ended up deciding that it was a good enough opportunity to jump on. So they, helped out and invested in this. And again, total Hail Mary, but couldn't be more grateful for it. During COVID, there were the first few months where everybody was terrified. Everybody was buying as much toilet paper as they could. It just it was a disaster. And so nobody wanted to do anything adventurous. But then after a couple months, and I say this in hindsight, but after a couple months of people getting pretty much being locked up in their homes, they're like, I want to get out and do something. I can't go to the bar. I can't go to any restaurants. I can't go to any concerts. I just need to get out of the house and do something. And I think, that's where we fit in. We were the something.
Yeah.
The last year with Just Get Wet has been a lot. Tried a lot of different things and done a lot of different things, and there have been many moments where I've felt like we've spread ourselves too thin and are trying to do too many things okay as opposed to a couple things really well. It has started to pay off. There definitely needs to be that focus. But for instance, with COVID, classes just went through the roof. This past year, there's a lot of talks about recession and things like that, and people are kind of going back to normal life, and there hasn't been that much of a demand for courses, but we've started to expand the spearfishing gear and the freediving gear and stuff like that, so that's kind of helped balance it out. So I think there is an argument for having multiple things going on. It's just finding what that limit is. Yeah, where we are now is also tricky. We're in a place where we've created a great community, got an incredible crew of instructors and assistants where we do provide the best classes that I know of. And I love that. But it's also at a point where we're all having to grind to sustain that. I think we've built the foundation, and we're at the point where we created a great service and product that is appreciated. I feel like I just love people that want to work in the ocean. I think they're very underserved. I think marine biologists spend like years and years of their life studying the ocean, and I know that it's hard for them to find any work, let alone any paying work. For captains, it takes years to build up that time to get your license, and then at that point you're starting from ground zero. Same with instructors. You can do all this work to get your certification, but then how do you find people to come through your class? It is a grind, and I want us to be a place where water people can make a really good living, and not just a hustling and scraping by living, but a really good living. How we get there? Don't know yet. We'll figure it out.
Cool. What was your equalization journey like?
I don't remember learning how to equalize. You just
do.
go to the bottom of the pool and hold your nose and blow. I don't even remember that. And I think this is an important thing for every freediver, that at some point you're going to have to pay the piper. You are going to have to go back to ground zero and learn every single exercise, every single technique in order to continue your progression. For some people, that happens right off the bat, and they cannot get to 5 meters until they do that, and it's really frustrating, and understandably so. But if you're able to get through that, then you will be, I'm not going to say you're going to be set for life. Like, there's always things to work on, but you've gotten the hard part out of the way at the beginning. I think I didn't have issues until I was getting to 35 meters. I could get to 35 meters, but I couldn't go through the 35 meter depth comfortably. And so, yeah, I had to kind of go back to the beginning, relearn everything. And for me, felt comfortable with all the technique and the mouthfeel things. I did, when I went to Deep Week in Bali, I just decided, hey, I am going to focus on mouthfeel. That is going to be my entire goal for this week. And it did take me about the whole week to figure it out and feel like, I would not say I've mastered it, but feel in control of it. The reason I wanted to do mouthfeel as opposed to deep frenzel is because I had had some issues with squeezes, and all due to tension. Yeah, kind of the idea of pushing through, just getting deeper. I think deep frenzel and mouthfill both work. For me, mouthfill was less movement in my throat and trachea, and so I decided to just kind of focus on that. For beginner freedivers, I would say you have much more capability than you know and you give yourself credit for. It can take time to be comfortable in the water. Basically, don't discredit yourself. It does take time to be comfortable in that environment, and only when you're comfortable in that environment will you be able to unlock what you can actually do. And I see a lot of people come through the classes that kind of push and try to get as much as they can out of the weekend and maybe come away a little bit discouraged. And I think if you just come back to one of our line diving sessions, you'll be amazed at how much you progress in that session without having to do any work. It's simply familiarity with that environment and with that exercise, and that goes a long way. With sports, with the military, stuff like that, I think with guys in general, it's all about just put the hammer down, go forward, try not to feel anything, and that's how you get to where you want to go. And I think there are instances where that can work. I don't think freediving is that instance. If you are an athlete and you're in shape and you're flexible and you've got all this, yes, you can get to respectable depths for sure, and probably depths that are deeper than you think you can get to. You can probably get to 40 meters just on being an athlete. If you talk to the top tier freedivers, they say that freediving doesn't even start until you get to like 80 meters. And so, yes, if you want to just experience this level, you can totally do it. But if you want to get to the next level, you're gonna have to go completely back to the beginning. You're gonna have to rework your foundation so that your expectation is that every dive feels great. Every dive feels relaxed and comfortable. Completely different than running a marathon or something like that, where you just know you're gonna be miserable for most of it and you have to hammer through it. This is not the sport for that. I had somebody who's a rock climber ask me this recently, and they said, when is that point where you go from being relaxed to the point where you're kind of like pushing and trying to progress and get yourself to the next level? And the answer is, you always want to be comfortable. You always want to be relaxed. And if that is your focus and your foundation, that unlocks so much more than you could ever get by pushing. I grew up spearfishing and I really loved it. I don't think well, I guess I haven't really hunted anything else, but the fact that some people just see bloody fish with spears through them and they're like, you guys are monsters. You are in their environment. You cannot breathe when you're doing it, and you really have to work to learn their behavior, learn your own equipment. It takes a lot to be able to effectively do that, and I think it's one of the most connected ways of harvesting food, which is something that's so disconnected with our kind of daily lives. And so I remember the first time I saw a white sea bass and I just heard about these things where divers go for years without seeing them. You have to be so stealthy and so smooth. That first time I saw that shadow and I knew what it was, there were two things. One was, I don't pull the trigger now, that thing is gonna be gone. And the other was, oh my God, I'm actually seeing this fish in real life. And I was really humbled because it did take a lot of work to get to that point. And Yeah, spearfishing adds so much. I think that it gets a bad reputation because a lot of people just want to post pictures on Instagram, and you know, that is what it is. But it's, especially this past year, has added a lot to my diving because I've focused on line diving, but going back to spearfishing, there's a lot of time there's nothing to do but sit and wait, and you really have to tune into your relaxation and your kind of like awareness of everything. But I don't know, I've been able to find more relaxation with that, which has helped me with my line diving.
Okay, on that would make me think of like, talk to me about urges to breathe.
Urge to breathe. Yeah, I get them early and often. Love that for me. I think that pool training works really well to work with that. Honestly, the thing that has helped me the most with urge to breathe is doing apnea walks on an exhale and just counting contractions, because I get them right away. And at that point, you know how many steps you can take. I count my steps I think I count my steps in my head and my contractions on my hand. When I do that over, you know, a few days, it doesn't take that long. You build up a bit of a tolerance. And then when you're underwater and you get a contraction, what your body is doing is saying, I need to breathe. And it's sort of like a panic response almost. But if you have built up that tolerance and done that training to say, okay, I know what this is, but I can do 20, 30, 40 contractions without having any issue, then it makes it not an emergency. Yeah, I guess you just gotta be comfortable with misery. But I think a lot of mine are from tension and flexibility. And so if you do those diaphragm stretches, it makes a huge difference. And I think we feel that when we stretch before we dive. Yeah. Being in an environment that every single part of your body feels that it does not belong. Like you feel that pressure, you cannot breathe, you have to clear your ears, like you are not of that world, amplifies things a lot. And I think for some people it can be a very beautiful thing. I think it should be a very beautiful thing. For me, it's brought stuff to the surface that I didn't even know was there. It's like I want to do this thing, but it's bringing up all this other crap, you know? And so I don't think it's always that storybook, beautiful, magical experience. I think it can be that, and that is what I work towards and what I want. But there's no bullshit. There's no filter. It is probably the most raw pressure cooker that you can go through. And when I started, I had those really, really beautiful experiences of like the first time I pulled down to 20 meters, I could see the surface, you know, so far away, and was so comfortable at that depth. And I loved that. And that experience is what got me hooked, is being comfortable in a world where you're not supposed to be comfortable. I love that contrast. You keep going into it and it'll test you. And I guess I want to get tested, and I want to figure that stuff out. And there has been, you can bullshit a doctor, you can bullshit a therapist, you can say whatever you want to your friends, but if there's anything going on with you and you try to do a dive, like, it will show, and there's no getting around that. How long have you been in the Navy? All me bloomin' life, sir. Me mother was a mermaid, me father was King Neptune. I was born on the crest of a wave, rocked in the cradle of the deep, seaweed and barnacles on my clothes. Every tooth in my head is a marlin spike, the hair on me head is hemp. Every bone in me body is a spar, and when I spits tar. As hard I is, I am, I are. Yeah.
We should make our students recite that.
It's so good.